Babylon was an ancient city that was renowned for its immorality and idolatry. It was kind of, but if you wanted to describe a wicked city, you would say Babylon. And Rome was the modern day Babylon. You got that idea? So Peter's using this language, it's kind of a nickname, and he's saying really the Christians who are in Babylon, that is in Rome, who were chosen together with all of you who I'm writing to, send their greetings. So we kind of know from what he says at the end of the letter there, even though it's in code language a bit, that he's in Rome. He's writing from Rome. And let's see who he's writing to. It says here, look at the greeting he gives to God's elect, that is to God's chosen people. And look how he describes them in the face of these difficulties. They are strangers in the world. This world is not really their home. This world is broken. It's oppressive. It's a mess. These people are strangers in this world and scattered, maybe by some of the persecutions, throughout Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, Bithynia, most of those places in what we would call modern-day Turkey. So he's writing here a letter that's going to be circulated to all kinds of different Christians over quite a wide area who are in great difficulty under a very evil and wicked emperor. So you've got that picture in mind. Peter is right in the thick of it in Rome, and he's writing to encourage these believers who are scattered, strangers in the world, suffering and struggling. So he's writing to encourage them. And I want to say, this is a letter that will be especially helpful to any Christian believer who is going through some kind of difficulty. It's true that we're not being tied to chariot wheels and driven through Rotherham until we're dead, but we do go through difficulties in our lives, don't we? And sometimes those difficulties are a direct result of our Christian faith. This letter will be really helpful. If you're facing a problem of suffering of any kind, let me encourage you to get to grips with this letter as we go through it. If you're wondering what God is doing in a complex world and what's going to happen in the future, if you wonder at the threat of competing ideologies and all the tension and stress that seems to exist in different places around the world, then this letter, of all letters, will do you good, because it was written to Christian people in exactly that boat. So it'd be good for us to suck all the juice out of what Peter says here and encourage our hearts as we remember the sovereign, gracious control of our God in his world. There's a lot in this letter that's practical and helpful. There's stuff here about families and marriage and work. There's even stuff in here about politics and how to relate to government of a day. There's stuff here about church and elders and leaders. And all the while, the backdrop to this is difficulties. How can we live for Jesus in a scary world that is often hostile to Christianity? Well, there's 5 chapters in this letter, so it'll take us a little while to get through it all, but just to give you an idea where we're going over this next 3 or 4 weeks, we're just going to be in chapter 1 to begin with. That's a good place to start. And this is just to give you some words. I want to just think about these 4 things: hope, love, evidence, and action. I want you to, over the next 2 weeks, today and next week, I want you to think about the fact that there are things that mark out Christian people as being different. There are distinctive things that make a Christian. And we're going to think about 2 of them today and next week. Inside this is, Christian people have a living hope and a joyful love. That is a good distinctive of a Christian person. A living hope and a joyful love. But I want you to understand as well, as Peter does, that Christianity is not just about what goes on inside. It is grounded in things that have happened outside of us. Christianity isn't wishful thinking, but it's grounded in history. And there is evidence. It isn't something that just arises in people's hearts because they think it's a good idea. But God has done things in history, real things, in time, in space, in our world. So even though Christianity has got distinctive inner features, it also is based on solid outward evidence. And Peter talks about that, and we're going to come on to that maybe in week 3. But the final thing that I want to note from chapter 1 is that Peter isn't just saying this because it sounds nice. He wants his readers to do something and be so. He wants them to be who they are in Christ, even in the face of their difficulty. Peter doesn't write something and think, oh, it's really hard at the moment. I think what you should do is all just batten down the hatches and just kind of, when this is all blown over, then you could live for Jesus. He doesn't lower his expectations. He challenges them to live for Jesus in spite of the difficulties that are there. That's powerful, isn't it? And a real challenge to us. So we're going to think about hope and love and evidence. And then we're going to move on to think about what that means for us in our lives, action. Is that clear? Well, hopefully it will become clear if it's not now over the next month. We're going to think about hope today. And I want to focus your minds today on verse 6. And let's see on the screen, we can read it again together. This is what Peter says in verse 6. In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. I want to just introduce this by saying 2 things about this verse. One is, I think you can see that this is an incredible contradiction in this verse, isn't it? Can you think of many sentences that would have the word great rejoicing and the word suffering in them? You see that paradox? In this you greatly rejoice, even though now you are suffering difficulties of all kinds. What's that all about? You're either happy or you're not. You're either rejoicing or you're suffering, aren't you? How can Peter say that both those things are true at the same time? Does that feel like a paradox? In this you greatly rejoice. There are things that make you very happy indeed, and yet you're suffering and you have to face reality and pain and difficulty. How can these things be both true at the same time? This verse is a very unusual combination of joy and pain. I think this is really important for us to realize that it is possible to live in this broken, confusing, painful world and know something of joy. It is possible to confront the reality that is really there and know joy. And maybe I should say this strongly. True Christian joy does not come from hiding from reality. It doesn't come by taking drugs and trying to escape from reality. It doesn't come by pretending that life isn't what it really is. True Christian joy can cope with the reality of a broken, confusing world. This verse says it, doesn't it? In this you greatly rejoice, even though now for a little while you have to suffer. We're not hiding from this, and we do know this. That's a great encouragement. You can see the relevance of this letter in such a dark time that Peter's writing in. But I want you to notice as well, kind of grammatically, that this verse is a kind of link verse. It's like a hinge that this little passage turns on. Because when Peter says, in this you greatly rejoice, he's looking back to what he's just been saying in the verses before, isn't he? And when you look at the end of the verse and say, you've had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials, then in verse 7 he goes, these have come so that, and he goes on to talk about the trials. So this verse is like a little hinge that the passage turns on. Can you see that? He's really talking about the joy, and then he's going on to talk about the sufferings. And this verse is like the middle of that, and he's referring back to it and then looking forward from it.